Hello, good evening, and welcome. My name is Robin McLaughlin, and I have with me today Ian Ogilvy and Robin Mitchell, both famed for their Poolcast podcasts. And I do the View from the Pool. And this is the first ever joint. We're actually videoing this and we're also recording it. So it's a joint session. And what we're really doing today came about from a couple of questions that I had fired to these two experts, was about turbidity, which you both probably know is one of my little bugbears, but we can get into that shortly. So how are you guys doing?
Brilliant, Robin. I love this term, expert. I can get used to that. A lot of people call me a lot of things, but expert's not usually the most common sense. Yeah, doing well, Robin. The sun's shining. It's work's picking
Yeah.
up, and the First Minister of Scotland has told us today that we're looking good for relaxing the restrictions. So yeah, long may it continue. How you getting
Yeah,
on, Ian?
and stop. Well, first of all, before Ian says anything, Robin, you need to stop playing with that pen.
Yes,
All I'm here is
I'm a fidget. I'm a fidget.
yeah, fidgeting. Right, Ian, you're free to shoot now because you guys are opening obviously down in England.
Yeah, so
next week.
So the 12th. So I was
12th, yeah.
at some outdoor pools on Saturday, doing some stuff with them. So they opened on Monday. The one in particular that I do a lot of work at is fully booked. They let them book 7 days in advance. All their slots are booked out, and they all have to pay in advance on the app. So that's it was fantastic. It was nice. 28 degrees out in the sunshine Saturday afternoon, helping them get all the lifeguards competent again. So that was good stuff. But yeah, I am really, really busy just now. It's picked up massively. On all fronts for me, really. Open water at pools as well.
Yeah.
It's good stuff. So I had a busy day today as well. So it's good.
Do you know what? Isn't it lovely to see on the news that today so many Lidos?
Yeah.
When's the last time you saw that on BBC, Sky, ITV, you name it? It was all these people jumping into all these massive big Lidos in central London all around the place. It was fantastic to see.
Yeah, it definitely was. So it's all really positive actually. So then I've sort of rushy day, and then I come back and I've got to face you two.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have to remember the exciting subject of turbidity.
Yes.
So I better explain to everyone, in your pool. So your poolcast, listeners, let's call them that, are generally in the field of water treatment, etc., and pool plant, and follow your expertise and good guidance. Whereas, I'm the other side of the coin with the lifeguards who don't really know much about pool water. Really, it's just something that's in front of them, and they've got to pull people out of. And that's my background, obviously. And I've asked Robin over the years quite a few times about turbidity, because in my role when we're looking at detection, the main thing for me is if I've got a camera and I can't see across to the far side of the pool, I can't detect. And it's been one of these things. Andy Reid from Places Leisure started calling me Dr. Turbidity or Mr. Turbidity or something because I went on about it so much. And it's still one of those things that I have great difficulty when I go to someone and say, look, your water's not great. And they go, well, I can see the bottom of the pool. So maybe one of you can take on in the first instance and explain to me, let's say, the technical side about what turbidity is.
Well, do you know what? This was discussed on Friday, right? And
Okay.
the
Where,
bit-
down the pub?
Yeah, well, yeah, that as well. Well, we wish.
Virtual pub.
Yeah.
Virtual
Yeah,
pub, yeah. No, there was
yeah.
a great meeting of minds on Friday.
Okay.
Ralph Riley, Ian Nix, myself, Ian, and Mike Schuff, and a few others. It was a Palm Academy meeting with PewTag. So
That's a lot of brain power and a lot of experience there.
something like that. There's a lot of pints in there that as well, So and I had the audacity to bring up turbidity, and it stirred a bit of discussion, and I suspect that Ian's going to be a wee bit controversial later on. But
Excellent, right.
we discussed what turbidity was, and I think it was Ian Nix gave a fantastic description. Most people think that clarity is when they look at the pool, when they look down, and if you can see a 50 pence piece at the bottom of the deep end of the pool, that's your swimming pool is clear, right?
Yep.
See if you've got good turbidity. You should be able to sit in the shallow end of the pool with the goggles on and see clearly the deep end of the pool. So you should be able to write your name in big writing at the deep end of the pool and see it from the shallow end when you've got your goggles on. Now, if you can't, then your turbidity is poor.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Okay.
That's probably the simplest way of describing it without starting to get into particles and molecules in the water.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, do you know what, Robin? It was, because I was going to start with this by something you said. So my first job as a 15-year-old was Dumfries swimming pool, the old one. That got,
Oh, I know it well.
yeah, so the old Dumfries swimming pool. I don't know if you knew that one, Robin, but it was right. It was right beside the river, and famously, the river would burst its banks, the car park would flood, and we'd all be off work.
That's right. Right across the bridge.
Yeah.
Right across the bridge. Yeah, I loved going there.
And
lovely new pool they've got now. But anyway, that's controversial. Let's go.
So my first experience of turbidity as a 15-year-old was 50 pence piece, the old 50 pence piece. We used to have to throw it in the deep end. Now, that was 3.8 metres deep at Dumfries. And you should. We were told that when there's no one in the water, you should be able to see whether it's heads or tails. Now, the amount of times that we used to go to reception, nick a couple of 50p's out the till, chuck it in the water, and there'd be about 10 of us stand around it going, we couldn't tell whether it was head or tails, and we'd never ever get the 50p's back, and you'd always get the kids diving for them, and they'd keep the 50p's.
Yeah.
Our tails must have never balanced by the time we were doing this. But and that was the thing, and it was from there that later on in life I learned about, when we look at clarity from a lifeguard aspect, it's a bit like Robin says, we've got what's called vertical turbidity and horizontal turbidity. And what you need to do is look at the horizontal turbidity of the pool, as Robin was saying, by sitting in the shallow and being able to look through the water. And we don't test it. And that was, for me, now looking back, that was the biggest problem with clarity of a pool, because we were always throwing the 50p pence in front of us and looking straight down, where we should have been throwing an object at the farthest corners of the zones of the lifeguard to see if you could physically see that object. And that was really my first experience of turbidity and what it meant to me and how it was. So that's really where it sits with me, to start off with anyway. It's moved on a lot since then.
Yeah, can I tell you then, how I got involved in this? And it was quite interesting. And funny enough, I actually think Aylesbury Aquavale was one of the pools that was involved in this. In that, so for detection, back, when we, we're kind of pioneers of doing what we're doing. And, some of the reasons, when we're using identical software in each site, the only differences you can have is your lighting conditions. The light is one, but the turbidity is the other. And I didn't really know what turbidity was. I did come to learn fairly quickly, but one of the things that I discovered very quickly was that, well, if I can't see the far side of the pool, if I can't see the grout lines in the pool, I know I've possibly got an issue there. And that means my detection isn't going to be as efficient and as effective as it used to be. But the comment was, somebody from Aylesbury said to me, I'm fairly sure it was Aylesbury, said to me, this thing won't detect, past halfway line. And I said, it's because your water's shit. Right?
That's a technical term.
So,
Yeah.
That's a technical term. And he said to me, well, can you define shit?
Yeah.
And that's when I went, well, actually, that's a very good point, because I can't. And that was the whole thing. I think I went and talked to you, Robin Mitchell, about where am I going to get something to measure this? Turbidity meters, what you need. And we started talking about it, and I started to learn. I got the PewTag book out, and I might as well have got out, Teach Yourself Tunisian for what it meant to me. But I did get a figure of what 0.5 NTU is what's needed. And I slowly started to work my way through about what was the best NTU levels to give me good detection across 12 meters, 13, 17, 18 and 25. So everything I did was just pure guesswork to try and put a little bit of science onto how you measure SH1T to tell a leisure manager. And of course, I think it was you, Ian, then said to me about turbidity meters are so temperamental. You can test it, take the sample and test it 4 times and have 4 different tests. And Robin's disappeared, or 4 different results. I'm sure he'll jump back in again, but that's still the case, I presume, isn't it?
And the interesting thing is when you start to think about turbidity, and I'm going to rewind a little bit to HSG 179, but version 3. So in 2003, when that book was written, I'd have to get the previous versions out to double check, but I know certainly in
Yeah.
2003, there's a table in there with a paragraph under it that makes allusion to 50-metre pools that are 25.5 metres wide. And it says that when the width of the pool that the lifeguard's looking across is greater than 16 metres, you may want to consider a lifeguard on the opposite side, right? Now, to me, that's
Okay.
alluding to turbidity. Now, having done lots of LZVT tests in the past, what I generally found with most pools, that I was doing over the years, was as soon as I got to anything between 16 to 21 metres, the mannequin would disappear. So when you're doing that drag test,
Right.
and you're sat in the shallow end, you're standing up as a lifeguard, you're dragging the mannequin away from you, all of a sudden it was as if it was a mirage at sort of roughly 18 to 21 metres.
Yeah.
It would just disappear completely.
Fades
And
into
then
the
that's
distance.
when I started to realise where the 16 metres was coming into play. So I think early on that it was alluding to turbidity. I mean, we're talking 2003 now, so almost 20 years.
Yeah.
But wasn't necessarily actually using the term turbidity in HSG 179. So I thought that was really interesting to start ourselves off.
Yeah. So it's kind of like somebody was recognizing in 2003 that you need good turbidity to help your lifeguards. And that's kind of disappeared in the next edition is really what you're sort of thinking.
Water isn't fully translucent. If water was fully translucent, and this is,
Yeah.
you'd fly over the Atlantic in a plane and coming in low, you'd say, oh, look, there's a couple of whales and a shark in the water. I can see them.
Yeah.
They're a mile down, but I can see them.
Yeah.
And you think it was, and I forget the name of it, there was that plane that was lost some time ago and they still haven't found it, that went down in the sea somewhere.
Yeah.
So if water was that easy to see through, we would have found all these things, shipwrecks that people have been hunting for hundreds of years. You just cannot see through that water.
Blackbeard.
Fluid-
goals
Yeah,
and
it's
all
in the
sorts.
shed.
Fluid in the chemical industry, fluids are measured with a specific gravity, right? So that's the weight of stuff in the fluid. So some chemicals, for example, sodium hypochlorite will have a specific gravity of 1.2, right? So that means that in the liquid, there's 0.2 extra stuff in it. So when you measure the weight of it, 10 litres would be the equivalent of 12 kilos because you've got extra stuff in it. So that stands to reason why you can't see, not all liquids are equal. So some water has more stuff in it than other water. And because of that, there's obstructions in the water. And that's where your turbidity comes from. So the more dead bacteria, pollution, chemicals, anything that's dissolved in the water will obstruct salt.
I presume,
Exactly.
stuff like that,
So
yeah.
salt water is heavier than fresh water because there's stuff in it, minerals and salts and so on. And that makes it more difficult to see through the water. And that's the essence of it. So if you've got hard water, soft water, if you use certain types of chemicals, if you use sodium hypochlorite, which has got more stuff in it, then you're going to get a higher turbidity level. Generally, it's down to the bacteria levels, the dead skin, the pollution that's in the water. That creates most of the turbidity in the water. Yeah, the dead bacteria. So pre-swim, basically, to improve your turbidity, the best thing is prevention, pre-swim hygiene. Yeah. Everything else is a treatment for it. Everything else is a treatment. But the best way to get the best one, in fact, see if you go and measure all swimming pools up and down the country just now, they will have the best turbidity levels that they've ever had. Because there's no shit in the pool.
Yeah.
Because there's no swimmers in the pool.
That's right. It's the best. So, if you've seen my recent video, Ian, that I did of the hair entrapment test, that Wishaw swimming pools never looked as good. So they were delighted with the video, probably because it looks so good, and they're thinking, that's our pool, and they're dead chuffed. There's nobody been in it, apart from me. I only pissed about a cupful, So,
I mean, I'll give you a laugh just on that because Farnborough, I don't mind mentioning it because they're going to knock it down. But Farnborough Pool, for years we've been saying, and I think Robin, you and I have had conversations about this a long time ago, and about various bits and bobs. We'll not go into it now, but I mean, we used to get calls about your detection isn't working and it's only working in this part and that part, and you'd go and say, look, we can't see the far side of the pool. It's because your water clarity. And Well, you want to see it at the minute. I mean, it is just incredible. It's flipping crystal clear. You know, it's unbelievable. So, yeah, all the pools are like that at the minute. Majority, anyway.
It's an indication, mind you. I mean, I'm generalising there a wee bit, Robin. It is an indication, though, that something wrong could be something wrong with your filtration. Because if your filtration isn't working, then you're not able to treat the pollution and the stuff that's in the water. That's the basics, real basics of it. And some countries advocate testing for turbidity a lot more frequently than we do. The PewTag book, and you know, maybe we're being a bit controversial here. The PewTag book.
We've had a debate on this.
Aye, it's too airy-fairy. It says this carry on about you should test for it regularly. What the feck is regularly? You know.
What does that mean? Well, every 5 years is regular.
You know
that's exactly my argument. My
wife says that's regular as well. I don't know what she's talking about. You know. You know. I might consider weekly regular. You know that.
I regularly hoover the house for my wife.
But do you know what I mean? You know, see the thing is, other countries will place an emphasis on turbidity because it is an indicator. It doesn't give you hard and fast facts, right? It doesn't tell you.
Is that because it's difficult to measure? You know, one of you talked to me about, you know, the measurement, the NTU. You know, what does it measure and how does it work? Who wants to take that one up?
I can't pronounce the chemical word of the NTU, so I'll leave that one with Ian. But
nepherometric turbidity unit.
That's it.
Nepherometric turbidity unit.
Yeah. So, on what is? Am I right, Ian? That's measuring. It measures how well light passes through the little.
So basically, you use a reagent to try and almost stain the water, to stain the particles, so to speak, and then it uses a light sensor from one side of it to the opposite side. Sorry, a light shining through a clear test tube from one side to the other. And the idea is it's a test where it's trying to put the light's trying to penetrate going through.
Brilliant. That's a great description. Just for the listeners, for the benefit of listeners, it's just the same as using a photometer. It's the same light emitting diode that shoots across, right? So it's nothing more complex than that. And Ian summed it up brilliantly. But to get people right down to the basics, it's just like the wee LED light that shoots across the photometer.
Yeah. Do you know what as Robin says, there is other factors at play which can be solved. So as an example, high alkalinity. Now, it's incredibly rare that we ever see pools with high alkalinity, especially the way we're burning through acid just now to get our pHs down. But high alkalinity...
Is that why?
Yeah, so any acid-based pH correction chemical that we're going to use, with the exception of CO2, which will mineralise, will decrease the alkalinity of the water. But when you do have high alkalinity levels in a swim pool, so I've got a couple of pools that are got boreholes on site, so they pull from boreholes and they end up with high alkalinity. It can cause the calcium salts to start to come out of the solution, so it can cause slightly cloudy water. And there is a theory as well that calcium levels slightly above 500 milligrams per litre as well can cause it to be a little bit cloudier than anything else. But it's not the be all and end all, because those things can be fixed, so to speak. We can do things about other chemistry, but I think the whole thing probably originates from starting off with selection of filtration. I had a great question today. And Robin, this will make you chuckle. So I was doing a little pool today, and I presume it was a high rate filter. I just presumed you'd probably get sand in there. And they said to me, no, we've got glass, because the company told us it lasts forever and it will never need changed. and it's advice like that, Robin. It was a small primary school pool, great people, fantastic, but unfortunately they believed what they'd been told. And I said, the theory is it'll last longer, 2-3 times as length as lifespan. I says, but the jury's still out a little bit, but in theory it could work. But they'll probably now have cloudy water in sort of 10, 15 years, so to speak, and be saying, well, we were told that media was last forever. That's why we bought that media, so we don't need to change it. And it's the advice that's given out. So and where as well, Robin makes allusion to sort of our European counterparts who are testing this on a weekly basis in some cases. But they're moving on to the next level of filtration. We are eons behind in the filtration level. And I think we've got to really,
You're still Victorian.
yeah, we have to accept and sort of give the listeners a bit of a micron and particle size that we're looking at. Do you not think, Robin?
Absolutely.
Think about microns.
Listen, we've talked about this recently, and Ian knows that I've had a wee visit before just before lockdown to see some of the new technology that's coming in terms of the ceramic filters and the perlite ore filters. Yeah, and we're talking. I mean, I'm a fan of the ceramic filters, and they're going down to 0.2 microns. That's cryptosporidium taken care of without a coagulant. That's right down. That's phenomenal filtration.
Yeah, because it's funny you mentioned cryptosporidium. It's the one thing I've actually learnt at all the PewTag things I've been at was cryptosporidium and microns. So I've learnt something, but I do get it. And actually, that's a very good question for me to pose to you. So, in the same way as I always say, life garden hasn't changed in the last 20, 25 years, I always have the impression that plant rooms haven't really changed in the last 20, 25 years. I know you've got the UV went through and all that sort of caper, and I can't remember what was those other lamps that we went through a phase of. But has ozone? That's it. Has filtration, or have plant rooms come on another leap and a bound in the UK?
I think to a degree some parts have. So, for example, a lot of automatic dosing units now will be digital. They'll link up to PCs. They'll give you warnings. So that's moved on leaps and bounds. Certainly the technology, but it's moved on leaps and bounds in our pool industry, but not necessarily in as a whole. Because if you think, for instance, some of them are deploying like Wi-Fi now and network connections. But I'm not being funny. Yeah. You can network to your washing machine nowadays. Oh,
your front doorbell.
Yeah. Funny enough, I've got one of them, but. When you think you've been able to network to things like washing machines and fridge freezers and various other things, eons in front of what you have pool technology, it's a bit embarrassing. Yeah. So there's an aspect of it's went digital, and there's an aspect of the equipment slightly better as far as energy saving. How we generate heat for swimming pools, how we pump the water. But the problem you get is, and I'm just going to hold this up here. So we've got our mobile phone, and I'll buy this phone today, and 6 months from now, it'll be the predecessor model, right? But the problem we've got in swimming pools is just because the unit you've got now is the predecessor model and whatever it might be, they will not replace that unit until the point of which it dies or it's discontinued and there's no spares and repairs. So they will run that unit till 10, 15, 20 years into the ground. And they won't say, I'm going to go down the road and get this unit now, or this type of filtration, should I say, for what we're talking about, because it's far superior. It's only going to be the day when that filtration dies and it is beyond its life expectancy and cannot be repaired that they'll actually say, right, now we're forced our hand.
So educate me in terms of, is it the filter vessels themselves? So all the peripheries like the pumps, etc., and the fancy computers, but it's still is the technology that's going on within?
Well,
Has changed any?
Listen, Robin, a filter is a filter, and it's been a filter for 100 years. Yeah. And some of the installations of late, and some of the filters that I see installed are not as good as the big stainless steel filters that were installed 40 years prior, right? Now, see, it's immaterial what you've got in your filter vessel. See if you don't have the basics, right? And Ralph Riley's going to love me here, right? He's going to absolutely love me. Flow meter. See if you don't know what your flow rate is, right? If you've not got a flow meter, you can't measure what your backwash rate is properly, right? So you don't know if you're actually cleaning the sand correctly after every backwash, right? So then, if you don't know if you're treating it, cleaning it, backwashing it correctly, then that could have an impact on the filtration. Without a proper flow meter, you can't actually calculate what the coagulant dose rate should be correctly. Now, you can to a certain extent using the hydraulics and using the pump size and the head loss, but to be as accurate as possible, you need a flow rate. And I think it was estimated, correct me if I'm wrong, Ian, that Ralph said a couple of years ago that 75% of swimming pools in the whole of the UK didn't have a flow meter that was working in their pool. They might have had one, but it had broken and it hadn't been replaced, or they didn't have one. So that tells you that we're not adhering to the basics. So when a swimming pool says to you,
Yeah.
my water's shit, and I've just had
Yeah.
my sand was changed 3 years ago, that's not really the issue. Are they actually looking after
Yeah.
the basics to make sure that it's backwashed correctly? Is the circulation rate right? Is the going back to the basics again? Have they done a dye test to check the circulation of the pool water? You know, are the inlets and the outlets all working correctly? Basics. Doesn't matter whether the swimming pool's
So the
100
flip-
years old or 50 years old or
Yeah.
5 years old. If they don't have the basics right, the turbidity will just be disastrous.
So is it like not having a speedo
Yeah.
in your car?
Yes, it's exactly like that.
How
Yeah.
fast you're
Yeah.
going.
I mean, it's
Right. Okay. See, you learn
it's not
something
it's not
every
just
day. I knew it. This
it's
would
not
be
just
good
that,
for
it's
me.
care for the sand. So, for example, what we can
Yeah.
get with sand is when backwashing's been not frequent enough or inadequate, what we'll often
Mm-hmm.
find is you'll have a large buildup of body fats inside the filter vessel. Now, what that can cause from time to time is it can cause the sand almost to congeal into a lump. So the whole thing congeals into a massive lump. It's almost like thinking you've taken a load of lard and thrown it into the filter and rolled it around
Yeah.
in the sand. And me and Robin's got some
Yeah.
fantastic pictures of this, where
bet
almost the sand almost looks creamy to a degree. It almost looks like it's got a
Yeah.
white cream in it.
Lovely.
And from there, what then happens? Well, sometimes you can start to get things like channeling, or what potentially happens is when the water comes up through the filter vessel, rather than go through the sand, it actually just goes down the sides and goes around the outside of the vessel because it can't penetrate through this ball of lard. So again, having a sand cleanse, which sometimes the actual grade of the sand is absolutely fine, and the sand's not within its lifespan. It's still got quite a few years left in it, and people don't realise as well. You can actually have the sand cleaned as well.
Purge
where-
it. Yeah, purge
yeah,
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not a great explanation, but it's almost like and this is how I like to explain it: shoving washing up liquid through it to almost wash the fat out of it, so to speak. It's not quite that,
Yeah.
but it's almost that's what you try to do.
Yeah.
Is you try to wash.
It's a good
You
analogy.
try to wash the
possibly.
oils
Yeah.
out of it, so to speak, and that's quite a relatively simple process and a cheap process. And you can certainly it'll give your sand maybe I don't know quite a few more years because it's not past its best.
Yeah, I've got a
Yeah,
lot of
so-
clients that do that every year, and it's an overnight job. You soak it in chlorine dioxide, you purge it, you backwash it, and the sand looks brand new. There's no channeling, no undulations, and you see if you've got decent filters with a viewing glass. See after that, you can actually see the coagulation occur when you go back to filtration. It's fantastic. But they're the ones. The people that that purge their filters tend to be the ones that have got the flow rate, have the coagulation dose at the right rate. They're doing everything correctly. There's no point in purging your filters if you're not backwashing them correctly. You're not using ideally you would want a rinse valve, so you can rinse your sand and then put it down the drain, the water down the drain. And but the amount of people that don't get their backwash rate right is frightening. But they don't measure it. If you don't measure it, how do you know what it is? How do you improve it? How can you tell? I mean, turbidity will is an indicator. That's why it's maybe not used as frequently as other things that give you a tangible, definitive answer. Right, by the way, the chlorine level is X and it should be Y. Turbidity will say, right, our turbidity is high, but then you now need to go and find out. You now need to do a process of elimination and to establish the issue.
That you've just led me into my next question to the both of you. So whenever I land on site and, instead of saying your water's SH1T, I take a reading, I take a few readings and I say, it's reading 0.7 NTU or it's reading 0.5 and we really need to get it down to 0.3. And they say to me, well, what do I do? Well, after I've stopped laughing, because they're asking me, because I just go, you need to sort out your coagulant. I didn't even know what coagulant was, for a long time.
Shit sticker. Best description is shit sticker.
And then the other thing I say is, how often do you backwash? And my final thing I ever threw at them, or used to throw at them, was, maybe if you slow your pumps down at night or whatever. I just, but I always say you need to speak to someone who knows about swimming pool water. And thus, I was just looking at that little article you helped write for me. God, it must be 5 years ago, Robin. But that just leads me to exactly what, if a pool calls you two guys and says, listen, that lad from Poolview's flipping throwing a wobbler here. He can't see across the pool. We've just spent 70,000 on a system and it won't detect anybody past lane 2.
Yeah.
Right? we'll fix it ourselves for a tenner, or we'll get the experts in. So, do you have a process that you work through? You know, is there stuff like you could even do? You know, if somebody rang you up tomorrow and said, "I'm not for nothing," obviously. Is there a process that you can start? Yeah, we had a chat about that. Ian. Is there a process you start?
It's funny because Ian and I had a wee discussion about that recently. Because if you think what we're doing right now, you know, we're in 3 different countries, all chatting, right? And Ian and I were like, we were having a chat. Someone could effectively get their phone out, go into a Zoom call, and take their phone into the plant room and start showing us stuff. Because see, in the past 2 years ago, I would be scheduling a visit, and I'd be like, right, listen, I'll come down in a couple of weeks. We'll go around the plant room, we'll do a system of checks. Now, Ian will probably check the same things that I would check, right? Coagulation, check the flow rate, backwash rate. Check.
So there's some basics. That's the point. There's some
check
basics.
The basics, annual filter inspection report. But then it would be a process of elimination, and we probably there isn't a checklist as per se. It's just a couple of consultants will go in and check the basics and then delve into it deeper.
So,
and Ian and I probably should make something, and we you could call us the Turbidity Busters instead of Ghostbusters or something.
Yeah.
Who are you going to call me? Your water
like
shite, you know?
It's a bit.
The Turbidity Busters. No bother.
Do you know what? It is, as Robin said, I would start things like when I go into, I'd say, right, okay, so age of the sand straight away, age of the media, should we say, and what type of media it is. Last filter inspection. Now, a lot of places I go to get filter inspections, Robin, but they don't get a report.
That's
so you don't get any digital. You don't get any digital photos. You don't get any micrometer measurements. So ideally, what they'll do is.
I'm sorry again. Excuse my ignorance here, but is that like a third party comes in and does that? For let's say I'm the manager.
Yeah, so
of
your
a pool
typical Baron Ray, FT Leisure, Sterling Hydrotech. As part of their annual service, that they will do a report.
Okay.
So the idea is that firstly, and this is a rough guesstimation, your filter's roughly 2/3 full of media, roughly, very very roughly. So I would take a measurement from the top of the filter to the top of the bed, right? So then maybe next year it's another 6 inches down. So I'll be saying to you, Robin, you've lost a bit of media. You need 3 bags, and that's typical what you get. You'd also get some digital pictures of the inside of the vessel to try and show you any corrosion that's starting to form. So then you've got a year-on-year picture. Then they'd take a sand scrape and some photos of the sand as well. Now the sand scrape is about a teaspoon, a tablespoon, and they would take that off and measure it with a micrometer. So let's just say, for whatever reason, the sand is size 10, and I'm making this up now. And next year it's size 9, size 8, each year. And they'll say to you that we know the nozzles or the laterals on the base of the filter are size 4. So when you get to size 4 or 3, it's going to go. So they'll say to you, year on year, you're losing 1. So that means in approximately 4 years, Ian, you're going to need a sand change before it starts spitting it out on the base of the pool, based on the. And what that then should do is give you a life expectancy of the sand as well. I mean, it might be something else would go wrong in the meantime between then and now. So as Robin says, I'd want to know when the media was last put in. Also, I'd want to see pictures of the last annual inspection. And I had a great one just beginning of last year at the start of lockdown. I had a pool contact me and said, Ian, I think I spoke to you before this, Robin. I want to do a technical specification on our pool to make it a nice modern pool. And the 1970s pool, right? So I went in and I said, write as a spec so we can go to tender for companies. So I wrote the spec, and anyway, I got around to the filters. I said, and they said, would you change the filter vessels? I said, no, massive steel vessel filters, leave them, brilliant, fantastic, proper 1970s engineering, just get a sand change and refurbish them. It was done last year. Okay, fine, who did it? And they told me who did it, and I was like, okay, not too sure, but it's due its inspection, so let's get an annual inspection. And then they said to me, they did filters in a day. 1 day, and I'm talking, I'm talking probably, Robin, diameter of 2.2 meters, filtered surface area around about 4 meters in each one.
1.2 meter deep as well, probably.
Yeah, and alarm bells are ringing at this point.
Yeah.
And because normally a vessel of that size takes about 5 days. Yeah. Right, and
that's tons.
To empty it and relay it.
Robin, that's tons and tons of sand that you've got to move.
Listen, I would.
By
I was very
hand.
lucky at Grangemouth Sports Complex when I was there. The staff used to do it
Still
themselves.
do.
Yeah, still do.
They're still in there, aren't they?
Yeah, working in confined spaces. What's that? Can you pass me on a lighter from the fag?
Brilliant. The Geordies.
Now that was the 1980s anyway. But that was all fair game then. But yeah, I get one day. But you see, that's people taking advantage of the whole layer in this industry that is like me, doesn't actually know bugger all about anything.
Yeah,
As far as pool, plant, and water goes, there's that whole layer
and as well,
is missing.
I think there's a conversation around being had of the micron size. So, we mentioned crypto before, which usually is around about 5 microns. They say between 4 and 6. And, to give it a bit of a basis for any of the listeners, a grain of salt is about 100 microns, roughly.
Yeah.
Talcum powder is about 8-ish. So when Robin was talking before about ceramic filters going down to about 0.2, 0.4 of a micron, 0.4 of a micron is a strand of protein. So we're now into most bacteria is between about 1 and 5 microns ish. So this is the conversation that needs to be had around the type of filtration that they're going to have, and this is all going to have an impact on the turbidity. Do you not think, Robin? Yeah.
Massive. Absolutely. Listen, basics. See, the thing is, the ceramic filtration almost it eliminates all the major obstacles that we've talked about, doesn't it? And I'm not saying that you should use it like a sticking plaster, but I just think it's something that people should seriously consider when they get round to, as Ian would say, when it's broken and time to fix it. Have a wee think about what's going to work best for you, in the long run. And Ian makes brilliant points here about the actual filter vessels, and he's spot on about the integrity of the filter is crucial. And little things like the dosing of the coagulant. How many times, Ian, do you go in and you see an LMI pump dosing the coagulant from a day tank? Now, sorry, Robin, a coagulant should be continuously dosed all the time, right?
Yeah.
Now, an LMI pump can't get down to small enough levels to dose it continuously. So what will happen is, you should be dosing your coagulant at 0.1 milligrams per cubic meter of your flow rate, right?
So it should be like a saline drip going into your pool, really. Is that right?
And you're talking that an LMI pump, it'll dose it in, it'll go click, click, and that's you for the hour. Yep. Because it's put in. So you've had your dose. And you're like, no, it should be dosed in. And it should be dosed in continuously.
So when people say to me, well, listen, we use our flock at, and I don't know the figures, but let's just say we stick it in at 10 milligrams an hour, right? Okay. But that should be like at 1 milligram every minute or whatever it's going to be, whereas they're just saying 10
to give you a bit of an idea, as Robin says, it's 0.1 millilitres per cubic metre per hour. So if you said an average 25 metre pool in the UK is roughly 450 cubes, circulation rate, turnover rate of 3 hours, so that means doing 150 cubes an hour, so that's 15 mil, right? Now, to give the listeners a bit of an idea, the old medicine spoon your mum used to give you cough medicine is 5 mil. Now, an LMI pump, it roughly will do about 5 mil in an injection-ish. Depends on the size of the pump, but call it 5 mil. So as Robin says, click, 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 or a couple of clicks. That's it done.
And that's the full dose.
And the problem with that is the coagulant then sits for an hour. And it has a lot of people in lockdown have found it's have a massive tendency to just gellify.
Do you know what? I read that in your
Facebook
page.
Facebook
page. It will gellify.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Yeah,
that's the issue they've got is they need to be able to, if it's constantly just flowing, just around and around and around, that by that way it's not technically stopped, and that's why you're dripping it in. And
so it's quarter of a milligram or whatever it is every minute or whatever it is, or every 5 minutes or something. Yeah,
peristaltic pump's the best one.
Yes.
It's like your.
Sounds painful.
It's like the one that's used for dialysis.
To you, Robin, it is. Yeah.
It's like the for the dialysis. Yeah. It's continuously dosed into a wee symmetrical tubing, and it goes in and out, in and out. It just trickles it in. It's a great way of doing it.
So my point being there exactly is that if I say to somebody, you know, what's your rate for your flock, you know, or your coagulant, and they say, oh, it's 15 milligrams an hour,
They would.
and they
Yeah.
think everything's all right, but in actual fact, what they're doing is they're banging it in
Yeah,
three doses, and that's
I
it.
think the next
instead of-
question then
and
needs
that
to
screws the
be,
whole thing.
okay, what type of pump is putting it in?
Yes.
So, you know, they might say it's 15 mil an hour, but then you go and you see it is a peristaltic pump, which is
Yeah.
great, you know, fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, there is issues with it. I mean, if you take an average barrel, so a 25 litre barrel of it,
Mm-hmm.
dosed at the rate we've just been talked about, it works out to be between 59 to 62 days a barrel should last. So one barrel is about 2 months. Call it 60 days. You know, and I had a pull
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
quite a few years ago, Robin, who someone had fiddled with the speed of the actual peristaltic, and they thumped a 25 litre barrel in one day. Right? Now, for want of a better explanation, do you remember when your mum used to make jelly molds for you when you were a kid? And she'd pour the jelly
Yep.
into like a car and a clown and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And you'd have
Yeah.
well, they made a jelly of their filter, right?
Right.
And I remember being there. They took the lid off the filter, and they said to me, they phoned me up and said, Ian, the inlet pressure gauge is off the scale, and the outlet pressure gauge is almost on zero.
Yeah. Nothing's
And-
getting
and I
through.
said-
Nothing's
I
getting
said to
through.
them, are you in the plant room now? And they said yes. I says, well, stop that pump right now before it goes bang.
Yeah, get it.
And
Get
I
out.
remember I went down and seen it.
She's going
And
down.
they actually got a
Brilliant.
kitchen knife, believe it or not. And they took the lid off the filter, and they got a kitchen knife out, and they stabbed this jelly coagulant, and they were cutting it out in cubes and lifting cubes
Flip
and
me.
throwing it out the filter. And this is some of the issues and the problems. You know,
And it,
Yeah, because see what you've taught me there is because people get very defensive with me when I say your turbidity's not great. It's probably a lot because they realize I don't know that much, but they get defensive about our plant and we do this and it's always been that way, and I can understand that. But even just that little bit of information you've given me there is it shows me how easy misdirection
Yeah.
can happen with people saying, well, Butag says 15 milligrams an hour and that's what we do. And a lot of people, I would stop at that. But what you've just explained is, well, actually,
Well, do you
that's
know-
not the full picture, and
the
that's
other
what I'm
thing there,
finding really
Robin,
interesting.
is right. We've talked about too much coagulant going in, but I remember going round a client. We went round all 6 of their swimming pools, right? And I was involved in getting the coagulant in PAC. They changed over from Kibble Dallam, which was dosed in by hand through the strainer basket, and so we went to the continuously dosed
Yeah.
through a wee peristaltic pump, and I went round. I was working for a chemical company at the time, so I went round with the area maintenance manager, and I was just talking to the managers of the pools, and I was saying to them, "Oh, how's the coagulant?" "Oh, brilliant, Rob, brilliant." And they said, "And do you know what? We're not spending half as much money as you thought we would." And I'm like, that alarm bells are ringing. I'm like, "What do you mean?"
Because
It says-
his commission's ringing.
You're right. I've already checked, and I'm like, why are they not buying loads of PAC? And every manager said, actually, we're still using the same drum that we got at the start, 10 months ago. And I'm like, that's not right, And we checked it, and there was blockages on the lines. There was, it hadn't been checked. They hadn't checked that it was actually going in. So in actual fact, if they'd had an outbreak of cryptosporidiosis and the Public Health Authority had come in, Public Health England, I've given the game away, well, whereabouts in the country it was, but for those that know my background, Public Health England would have come in and they would have crucified them for not having a coagulant that was working, because you've not got a defence against cryptosporidiosis.
And do you know what? That's a great point for Robin. And just I say this a lot of the time, but not everywhere, Robin. What they often do is once a week they'll put a little pen line in the barrel.
Yes. And the
Just to
date
show
on
that it's
it.
going
They'll
down.
put the date on it. They'll put the date on it. That's all right, so long as they do that, and they do that in the same day every week. Because I've seen it where it's just a dog's dinner on the drum. And then Brent go bananas because it's a returnable drum, and they can't take it back because it's full of marker pen. But it is a brilliant way of doing it. Yeah,
Brilliant.
that's about the best way. There are suggestions from people in the industry that we should be measuring the aluminium levels in the water, Robin.
Yes.
And I would only advocate that if you think you've got a problem, because aluminium levels can be influenced by source water and other things that are in the water, to be honest. So it's not scientifically proven that the aluminium levels are intrinsically linked specifically to your PAC dosing. But yes, it can indicate that you're using too much, or too much has gone in.
So, just for Mr. Uneducated here, just to make sure I've got this right. So, coagulant is put into the water to bring particles together into something lumpier, so that it catches and filters. Is that if I got the basics right
in
there,
a nutshell. So what it is generally aluminium is used because purely it's got a positive ion charge, and dirt particles have a negative ion charge, and that's why I refer to it as a dirt magnet. So it pulls the particles together. It causes what's called a coocidal matter, and then it'll cause what's known as microflocculation across the top of the filter, where it makes sort of a gel.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it works.
The shit sticker loves shit, right? That's and it's romantic, and it's all about forces of attraction. Robin, is that all right? Yeah.
I get it now, but because obviously when I'm looking across the pool with my camera, and it's, it's like the whole thing. We always get, it must be great with 4K cameras looking across a pool. Well, we don't use 4K cameras because you can't see across a pool because it's, as you said earlier, Ian, it's not clear. It doesn't make a difference from 4K, 2.7K, 1080p is fine for seeing right across the pool, because you can never improve that level of detail. No matter clarity.
I don't know, and I'm not a big advocate of this, right? But I've been to swimming pools that use Wapotec, right? And Wapotec is from Switzerland. It's a chlorine dioxide type of chemical that is used to enhance coagulation, for a start, using hydrosan and hydroxide, and to eliminate organics in the water. And I have to say, and I'm not an advocate of Wapotec, I have to say the water was phenomenal. And you could, I mean, Ian, you've seen the marketing photos that they use, and you can see your name written on the deep end from the shallow end. The clarity, there's no turbidity. It's phenomenal. I don't think it's necessary, and I really do think that what we've talked about in terms of the basics are just as, in fact, a lot more important than putting Wapotec in. And there's an argument that SP Filtration, who do put the Wapotec in, probably improve so much of the housekeeping and the basics that's had a big influence anyway. But those pools that have got Wapotecs, just I can't argue with the outcome and the result. But to be honest, 95% of swimming pools in the country need to improve in the basics before they look at anything else.
Well, I mean, just to reiterate that, I mean, I do, as you know, I get into the pool sometimes with my camera and, take stills. So there's two pools that always jump out at me. There's one in Dorking, which is just amazing water. The guy that looks after that down there, Ben Jones, I think is his name. And the other one's the 50 metre at University of East Anglia. Diagonals. It's just incredible, the imagery you can get. Oh, man, it's just...
Ian, what's the water like there? Is that not hard water?
In Norfolk it is, and also in Dorking.
Water, isn't it?
I know Dorking.
Really hard water. I'm talking mega hard water.
Norfolk, it's not too bad in Norfolk.
No, all right, okay.
But it's just it's interesting to me that I know all the really good pools, and I know all the really
not so good.
I shouldn't say, but not so good pools. And you tend, you work out which people on site know what they're doing and which people don't know what they're doing. And I think this is this whole conundrum, like you're kind of bringing it back to, how can you guys help with this?
I think,
and we were starting to touch on it about, getting into people's plant rooms from remotely.
I think as well, Robin, what is interesting is that I think you need to look at the setup, because if you've got, and a lot of pools don't have this now. A lot of pools will have one plant engineer on a contract that'll be between about 5 sites. But if you've got one plant engineer who's based at this site, it's his baby, and he's 20 years there, and he knows that pool like the back of his hand, and it's like he's it's like he's
his baby.
It's like the son that he never had, so to speak. Then the water quality, you're probably looking at being absolutely fantastic. But
Yeah, because he's all over
but
it.
where you've got a maintenance guy, or in some cases they don't have one, it's all on call out, from companies, and the duty manager is the one who has to try and do it running around with everything else at the same time, and all he's done is his 3-day PPO. And the manual for most cases is like 300 pages, and there's no way we're going to get through that in 3 days.
Yep.
Yeah. I think that's the pools that maybe struggle a little bit. And I'll tell you, I've just had a thought, Robin. I know what we and you should do. We should take Robin when all this pandemic's finished, and we will get him to do the old turbidity test that Mr. Nix has taught us about.
Yeah.
Have you?
Periscope.
Periscope.
Yeah.
Periscope.
So we need to get our hands on this, where you get the old periscope and the white dot, and we will do this turbidity test to see how well it can work.
And we'll use the turbidity meter at the same time to see which one's the best.
But it's one of the things that we're looking at with technology. Can we use our cameras in a way that can give indications of where we are? But I think one of the questions I'm going to throw at you is, I'm the only one who really cares about turbidity because I need it to be good, and the only operators that start to care about turbidity is because all of a sudden they've paid a lot of money for a system. It won't work till they sort out the turbidity, so it's all hands to the pumps, excuse the pun, and they throw it at it. But everybody else doesn't give a flying.
No, do you know what? I'm going to be quite controversial here, because I'm worried about what's out in the public domain in the last sort of week or so. So I've spoke to both Robins about this, because I know it's come out in the public domain, where UK Active published their drowning detection system report, right? So I'm going to read you a line from this, and this is my worry, because people read this report and they read it and think it's chapter and verse. So I've got a line that I'm just going to read you out of this report on page 13, and it says on page 13, water clarity or turbidity is a vital factor in the performance of the drown detection system. If the water clarity does not reach the legal requirement or decreases over time, it should obstruct the system from identifying the swimming difficulty. Now, I am extremely worried with this report. I'm not going to lie to you guys. The legal requirement, it says. Now, I'm not being funny. I'm nearly 30 years in pools, specialising in plant rooms. Robin, you're about the same as me. Obviously,
you would die for.
I
a
would
legal
die for a
requirement,
legal requirement. I'm telling you, turbidity busters are here. Who you going to call? Me and Ian are going to be working 24/7 on this legal requirement.
And I know why we're having this podcast tonight. We're having this podcast because of turbidity is a massive issue when it comes to drown detection systems. Okay, Robin, obviously you're advocating Poolview, and I get that. But it doesn't matter if it's Poolview, Angel Eye, Poseidon, whoever it might be. Turbidity is key. And let's even put that to the side. Even if you're not having a drown detection system, you should be keeping good turbidity anyway for the swimmer, regardless. And for the lifeguard's vision not to be obscured across the vista of the pool as well. But, a lot of money was spent in that report for, I'm not being funny, a lot of money was spent in that report for what is wholly inaccurate. And that's just one of several serious flaws throughout the report. And what's really interesting in the report itself is it goes on to talk about exactly what we've been talking about, which is 0.5 metrophonic turbidity units. But later on in the report, bearing in mind it's now identified that there's a standard to test for, and I emphasise this, there's a standard. There's not a legal requirement. That's be quite clear. There's not a legal requirement. But later in the report, when you actually read it, it then goes on to talk about water clarity. So the report goes into water clarity. Now, Robin Mitchell, I don't know if you've read this report or not.
Not fully yet. Not fully. I've got it.
He's waiting for your summary.
So bear in mind what we've just said on the actual pool itself. Let me just read you this. This is another great bit of information on this. I can't find it now. Oh, here we go. Found it now. Pool water clarity at the time of the visit of the test. Can the pool floor markings be seen? Yes. Now, the reports just spoke about an actual test, 0.5 NTU in a swimming pool. And it's then just going on to say, can you see the lines? Yes. I just do not get it. Now, for me, this is one of the major flaws. Now, Robin and I deal with science all the time and deal with scientific structure. You know, we see pull systems, products making claims. Now, I'm not being funny. I was taught when I was in science at school that for a test to be valid, you've got to have a control, and then you've got to have a variant on the test. Yes? Mm-hmm. Now, your control...
For validity. For validity.
Yes, for validity of the test. So your control is 0.5 NTU, right? That's your control. That is your control there and then.
Yeah.
So when you've got a control and when you've got a standard, granted not a legal standard, but you have got a standard, you cannot compare 4 drowning detection systems when the turbidity of those 4 pools is completely different. And all they've done is judged it by a visual eye, which may not have been the same person, but then again it may have been, so I'm speculating there, by them going, I can see the bottom. Right? Because then we're in a whole different ball game now. Then I'm into the ball game of saying, right, Robin, Mr. Mitchell, have you got 20/20 vision? You know, Mr. McLaughlin, what's your vision?
Yeah.
Too many factors involved there. Too many.
Yeah, you know.
It's kind of what I said at the very start, isn't it? You know, about putting the science into your watershed.
Yeah,
see, Robin, the thing
you've got
is,
to science behind it.
You can. Nobody tests for turbidity because. Nobody can. They don't have turbidity meters, and
they don't have the equipment.
They don't have the equipment, right? And it costs £400 or £500 for, roughly speaking, right, for a unit. Now, but people are unaware that you could ask your bacteriological sampling company to just do it at the lab. So when you get your month, which this is. A regulation that under COS 2002, you have to get your water sampled monthly or weekly in hydrotherapy pools. You could just bolt on a turbidity test to that. Now, that would just be once a month, but it would be better than where we're at now. You know, and I'm not going to start guessing how much labs will charge, but you're then getting a scientific test, a proper test done of your turbidity, and it's not done... No disrespect to the people that are doing a water test on site, but it's getting done under lab conditions, which is so the accuracy is going to be there, and it's not doesn't cost the earth. That's for sure. It doesn't cost the earth.
And do you know what the great thing about that as well is? We said this before. The term regularly applies at this point. So there isn't a standard for it.
Yeah.
So them turning around and saying, even if we said, for example, as Robin said, that you said to your microbiological testing company, can you do it every 3rd month? So it's once a quarter. Yeah. That is regular. Ideally, I would probably say once a month because that's when they come in.
Perfect.
But, at this point as well, what you could see, Robin, if I said to you, I'm thinking about a drone detection system, and you say, right, Ian, let's have a look at your pool, let's have a look at it. Do you do turbidity reads? Do you know what, actually, Robin, we've been doing them for the last couple of years.
Brilliant.
And then
you've got history.
I show you my turbidity reads, and it's going 0.6, 6 months later 0.7, 0.8, and you straight away can say to me, look, Ian, I'm not being funny, but until you get down to 0.3, evidence has showed us in the past from putting systems in, it won't work.
Yeah, because that's kind of the interesting thing for me in that I've got to admit, fairly well worked out what NTU I need to see across, a 12.5 meter pool. I need 0.4 or better. Once I get into 18 meters, I need 0.3, and certainly when we get to the 25 meters, it's not much above 0.2, or 50 meter pool. Sorry, and they 50 by 25s. But the interesting thing, and you mentioned it there about that, the UK active testing, about that way of testing the turbidity and the clarity. Because the other thing that affects all of that as well is your lighting conditions too, and there's just so many variables. Well, it's unbelievable.
Great that you mentioned that, because the lighting conditions in the UK active test varied from a lux level of 189 to 396. On the pools. Now, the thing that makes that really controversial for me is that why was the lighting test not just were all the lights working? Yes, because that's what they did with the turbidity. It was a case of can I see the lines? Yes. So why wasn't? So they went in with a lux meter and actually measured the level of the lighting on these pools. Yeah. But they haven't went in with a turbidity meter, and they could, because it could have turned out that the darkest pool had the highest turbidity. which failed the test.
Yeah.
So it invalidates the whole report.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It is. I know I talk about turbidity for us, but at the end of the day, I'm talking about it for all detection, because generally speaking, everybody uses cameras that look across the water, and whatever way we analyze the data, it's all different with each company. There's only 4 or 5 in the world, but the bottom line is, if you can't see through the water, you can't see a victim or someone in trouble, and that's why turbidity is such. For me, it was like beating my head off a brick wall quite a lot, but I still don't see sort of light at the end of the tunnel, because if you don't have to improve your turbidity above, get it even to 0.5, if you don't measure it and it's 0.7, well, the water's still safe, isn't it? In my naivety, I might say, look, the water's all right, my pH levels are okay, my TDS is all right. Sure, what's the worry? What would you say to that?
I think we struggle with the message at times. I mean, I've spoken to Robin with this. We are a year down the line, yeah. And, we should be, and putting turbidity to one side for a second, we should be looking at pools now that are 7.074, minimum 1.5 free chlorine, tested every 2 hours, right? That's a quick summary, a very, very harsh quick summary.
Yeah. Yeah.
I could name 50 pools I've been to in the last year that are nowhere near that have never read it. Right. Pool I was at today, Blue Book, here's the Blue Book, PewTag, read it? No. Technical notes from coronavirus of the past 12 months, seen them? Nope. Code of practice? Nope.
And remember, Robin, that this is why turbidity is not being taken seriously, because
nothing else.
But the most important thing general to pool managers is the chemical levels in the pool, and there are facilities out there that are struggling to get that right. So, in all fairness to PewTag, I know I said at the beginning that I felt that it was a bit airy-fairy. They're probably trying to say, Robin, let's walk before we can run. Let's try and get the basics, the real basics, correct before you start throwing turbidity into the equation. To me, turbidity is a basic, but it's an indicator that something other than turbidity, or turbidity is indicating that something might be wrong. But when your pH is high, when your pH is too high, the chlorine's not working. That's a definitive answer, and you can't ignore that. So that's what PewTag need to take care of. So it's a difficult one. Trying to get PewTag and other companies to take turbidity serious is it's ongoing. What would you like? Cut to the chase, Robin. What would you like to see? What would be utopia for you when you go into a client's swimming pool, right? And they tell you your cameras are shit, and you can see literally, right? You can see. You don't need an empirical evidence test of turbidity to tell you that their water's shit. What would be utopia for you? Start from in terms of a journey from when you walk in there and deal with the client.
Well, I suppose a lot of it is, I'd like to be able to refer to, like, you guys, for example. 4 or 5 years ago, that somebody would say, well, we've got our own guys, we've got a plant man. I think because when you start looking at the level of investment, and again, this is for any detection system or any surveillance system, I think the leisure industry needs to start going, well, okay, we need to actually use people who know what we're talking about. And I think what scares me quite a lot with just this conversation, and both of you said this to me separately, was that, whenever you look at Europe, what's going on in Europe, and the standards that they adhere to, and we're kind of still working in the last century. So I think there's a whole lot, but the looks of it and the sound of it have to pick up its steps, and I think turbidity is going to be just a little bit further down the line. But for me, I would love it that more people understand it and know why we need to have it. But I do love your whole thing that you said about it's kind of it's another little health check on how your water is and what's going on in it. So it's not just because your pH levels are all right, because that's all everybody ever says to me. There's my pH levels. Do you know what I mean? So I still can't see across your pool. And that's the whole point of it also. It's just one of those things that's been interesting to talk about. And I think the interesting thing for me is that there's no one single answer. It's not a one pill will fix this. It's this whole holistic thing. You've got to go in. You've got to have guys like you, experts, who go in and go, okay, let's start with a flow meter. The what? And take it from there.
Yeah,
no, definitely.
Well, I know we've been talking for about an hour now, so I suppose that's a good place to wind up because probably most people have fallen asleep by now. But listen, genuinely, I mean, I found it really interesting because you kind of brought it down to my level. You helped me understand some of the issues, and I'm hoping. My idea of asking you guys to do the Poolcast View from a Pool thing was because I've got an audience, if you like, who have no clue what turbidity is. But it's introducing you guys to that audience as well, and taking your Poolcast audience that there is people out there that need to know a little bit more about turbidity. It might stand them in good stead someday, and things might work.
Do you know what, Robin? It might be in the first instance a good thing when people start having problems. You direct them to this podcast. Say, have a listen to this episode. It was recorded, I don't know, 6 months ago, a year ago, whatever.
Yeah.
And you might learn a little bit more, and then we can talk again.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's generally my idea. It's like some of these things I would write, and it's great to be able to point somebody to something like this. So, if I've got an issue with turbidity in my next pool, in fact, there's one today I was looking at, I can say, lads, have a wee listen to this, and maybe contact Ian or Robin, and take it from there. And that's what I'd like people to do instead of this closed shop and getting defensive. There's nothing wrong with my water, etc., when there is. All right, lads. Well, listen, that's been a pleasure. I'm glad we did that. And I think, on the longer finger, we're looking at doing something like this again when restrictions are lifted and you guys hit.
Yeah,
that's
going to happen. That's definitely going to happen.
We're going to come and see you, Robin. We're going to come and see you. Yeah.
Yeah, but we'll have to do. Yeah, it'll be nice to sit around the table.
And the Tipsy Bird. That's a bar in Belfast, by the way. That's not a frequent bird that we go and see. It's the Tipsy Bird. It's a crack.
Yeah, he's only saying that, Mary.
Crack night, Tipsy Bird.
It's beside the goat's toe, if I remember rightly.
Yeah.
All right, lads. Listen, brilliant stuff. Really enjoyed that, and thank you very much.
Thanks for having us, Robin. Cheers.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Yeah. No, well, don't forget you have me as well. Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers,
All the
guys.
best. Talk to you soon. Cheers. Bye.